Joining us now from Miami is Sabrina Rodriguez, national political reporter for The Washington Post, and Basil Smikle, professor of practice for the School of Professional Studies at Columbia University and a Democratic strategist. Sabrina, I want to talk with you first. All right, going back to something that Brian mentioned at the top, the role of inflation, which was a huge factor in the presidential election. You're in Miami-Dade County, where 55% of the voters there voted for incoming President Trump. And they were among the American people who gave Donald Trump a mandate to lower prices. How critical do you think it's going to be for him with that voter base to actually deliver? And do you think they're going to hold him to account?
I think the reality is he's going to have some level of grace here. There's going to be that starting period, that being very excited about, him having won and this perception that it was with a strong mandate, and that in places like in Miami-Dade County that they, feel that they were decisive in his win. But in the long term, it does matter. And it matters how much exactly prices do go up if they do under Trump. We've talked about, and it was mentioned in the package, the impact that tariffs can have on all of this. I think if prices stay, roughly the same, people that voted for Donald Trump, that like Donald Trump, will, either believe that they've gone down or talk about, oh, no, it's not that bad. Things are actually better. But, if there is egregious increases in the prices of things, for those folks who maybe voted for Biden in 2020 and then went and voted for Trump in 2024, it is going to be a harder sell to believe that he's doing a good job.
Basil, do you think the incoming president is going to get a grace period? And when does that clock start? And when does the alarm start going off?
Yeah, I agree with Sabrina. I think there is a bit of a grace period because his supporters, his voters, really want him to succeed. I mean, I wouldn't say that they don't want him to succeed. But when you look at what's happening currently, I mean, the fact that in many ways what the story around the Trump White House that will actually take effect next year, we're having so many stories about it this year, it's almost as though he's already in office. And I think that's partly because he wants to make sure that whatever goes wrong in the next month gets blamed on Biden rather than get blamed on him. I'm not sure that that's 100% successful, but what it does suggest is that there is some uncertainty, and you raised that in the package, that he can't control a lot of these macro issues. The most that he has is the rhetoric, but at some point that rhetoric is going to grow very, very tired. And I'll just say this very quickly. During the Trump presidency, he spoke more about what Haitians eat than the price of eggs. So if you don't get to that kind of underlying economic issue that really does bolster the lives of most Americans, they're going to come back to him and say, well, what have you done for us lately?
Basil, I want to stick with you for a sec because I want to talk to you about the Washington Post is reporting that the Fed is now starting to weigh in on how Trump's policies could fuel inflation, with some Fed officials considering them as a possible source of increased inflation. Some of the things the incoming president has been talking about, including tariffs, including potential trade wars, including, having this new tiff with Panama where a lot of the goods that we're getting go through. These could get very expensive. Which are the ones that stand out to you as things that could potentially fuel prices rather than bring them down?
Well, I think the tariffs are probably top of mind for me. Look, he's talking about Panama. He's talking about Greenland. I don't know how much that costs, but, he's even talking about swapping Puerto Rico for Greenland. I mean, first of all, if you put aside the imperialistic activities and notions behind all of that, I mean, the purpose is to try to cozy up in many respects, to cozy up to our enemies and make enemies of our friends. I think that all of that uncertainty and that kind of chaos is what would likely trouble the markets. But I'd also point to the fact that Elon Musk himself, the sort of co-president that he's portrayed himself to be thus far, has said that the Fed is overstaffed. So he's sort of pointing that government spending reduction lens at the Fed itself. I'm not sure how effective that's going to be, but I think all things considered, it would concern certainly investors, and I would imagine some of our foreign allies.
Sabrina, I want to get your take on this, too, because I covered the last administration. I was at the State Department, and this Greenland thing came up that time as well. No one really checked with Greenland to see whether or not they were on board, and they said pretty distinctly, we're not for sale. Similar information has been shared this time. But, in the last week, we've seen Trump also threaten to take back the Panama Canal and say that Canada could become the 51st U.S. state. How do you think that's going to go down with voters? Is that something his voters are looking for? Is it even on their radar?
I think for a lot of folks, this isn't necessarily going to be something on their radar. And the reality is that this is part of the Trump persona. For folks who voted for Donald Trump and his supporters and the thousands of people who, went to his rallies across the country, there's this perception that this is Donald Trump. He jokes and he's funny and he's not really serious. And if he is kind of serious, oh, well, haha, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. So for a lot of folks that supported him, I feel like the perception around these conversations that he's having, it just feels like typical Trump. I think if it becomes in earnest, if it becomes a huge focal point for him, if it is something that we are hearing him consistently talk about, it might penetrate to the American public and folks might be talking a little more like, is he serious? And what does this actually mean? But I think for now, it just plays into, oh, Trump's off the cuff and he, says what he's thinking and maybe that is a good idea. While obviously folks who are not supporters of Donald Trump are concerned about, hearing him say things like this.
I talked to some officials in Panama yesterday. They said it did not go over well down there. Basil, I want to talk to you about the fact that, Trump made really big, kind of unexpected gains with Black and Latino voters this last time around, partially due to his economic messaging. We've got a headline here from last year. Vox said Black and Latino Americans haven't experienced the same economy as everyone else. What challenges could Trump face from trying to confront this?
Well, I think it's similar to what I said before, that there are a lot of macro issues that the president of the United States really just cannot control. But this is not a new problem. I mean, when white Americans get a cold, Black Americans, Latino Americans get a flu, this is not a new issue. It is true that actually Black and Latino Americans interestingly enough, did a little bit better during the pandemic, but those gains have largely gone away. And what has persisted is the wealth gap between white Americans and Black and Latino Americans. And that vexing problem is yet to be fully and truly fixed by Republicans. And certainly Donald Trump doesn't seem to have the policy chops or care as much about policy to fix it. But I will say it's also a challenge for Democrats because, again, as you pointed out, a lot of the voters that supported Donald Trump believing that they were going to fight for him, Democrats have to prove to some of these voters that they're going to fight for their interests as well, particularly these very specific and really vexing economic disparities that seem to not be able to go away.
Sabrina, when you talk to voters in your area, what are they saying about the outlook for inflation and for immigration? This past weekend, incoming President Trump once again reiterated his promise of mass deportation for illegal immigrants. How realistic is that goal? And is anybody kind of putting together how much it could cost? The Immigration Council now says deporting 1 million immigrants a year would cost about $88 billion. Are voters tying these issues together, or are they still kind of focus on the talking points of the election?
I think a lot of the focus still remains on the talking points of the election and for his supporters, of course, as we talked about, sort of that grace period that, he's figuring it out and he's going to get it done. But the reality is that Trump on the campaign trail was not talking, of course, about what the cost of this mass deportation is. And I think the reality is that he played on certain nuances within working class Americans, within Latinos specifically, to sort of make this point of, with Latinos in Miami-Dade, for example, saying, OK, you're not the same as the people that I'm saying I want to deport. I'm talking about deporting the people who came recently, or I'm talking about deporting the people who are not hardworking Americans or are criminals. Of course, we know from what his actual plans are that he wants to deport every undocumented immigrant in the United States. And there is not necessarily that distinction around, being a criminal, or a distinction around, who's working and who's not. But there's still this perception around the plan as, okay, well, let's see how he gets it done. While we, of course, know, he is angling to get this started on day one. His first hires and first staff picks have been folks focused on immigration. But I think still the reality of what this will cost, of what the impact will be, will not really hit with the American public until we see, a month, weeks in and start seeing sort of those images of him sending folks and what the bill is for that.